Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Central Florida. And in this video, I will construct part 5 of my series on bystanders and the Holocaust. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the churches and religion. I'll be relying on two chapters from the Oxford Handbook of Holocaust Studies. This is really a wealth of information about all kinds of topics, but I'll be relying on a chapter by Spicer and a chapter by Erickson, and this was published in 2010, Oxford University Press. In terms of looking at the Catholic Church, there's been a lot of debate on Pope Pius XII and his role and what he was able to do and what he didn't do. And there's books and articles and all kinds of discussion about this. Spicer points out that it appeared that the Catholic Church in general was indifferent to what was occurring, and a lot of this was based on protecting the church. At first, according to Spicer, Catholics were forbidden to join the Nazi Party, but that was revoked when the Nazi Party gained more power. Spicer also points out that it's been difficult to obtain archives for analysis. Also, that we should consider anti-Semitism that was present in each country that we analyze and how that interacted with the institutions. Spicer points out that the relationships and situations varied, as did the responses. So while you'd find that some clergy members were bystanders, or in some cases, Spicer points out some clergy helped Nazi war criminals escape. In contrast, we also find that some clergy saved Jewish lives. And so this is really an important area to analyze. And again, I think what we can do is take the model presented from Monroe, looking at the moral psychology and how she differentiated between the rescuers, the perpetrators, and the bystanders, and apply that perhaps to different churches and see how that materializes. According to Erickson, the Protestant church in general was complicit and supported the Nazi Party at the time. And there's also a lot of history and debate about the role of the Protestant church during the Holocaust. Okay, moving along, and again, we could have very long discussions on any of these topics. Sometimes I think I'm not covering enough, sometimes I think I'm covering too much. But I'd like to move on to another area that actually I'm going to go ahead and go into a study. And this was something that caught my attention while doing literature reviews and searches, was an article by Van Baar and Huisman titled "The Oven Builders of the Holocaust, a Case Study of Corporate Complicity in International Crimes," published in the British Journal of Criminology in 2012, issue 52, pages 1033 to 1050. One of the things that I had mentioned in a previous video when I presented the case of Marion Samuel is after she was killed in the gas chamber in Auschwitz, the next day, this company came out to demonstrate their advanced crematoria. So let's look at this case study on the oven builders by Van Baar and Huisman. They ask, how do we make sense of corporations and criminals? And how does our understanding of corporate crime help us understand what happened during the Holocaust? And in order to look into this and analyze this in great detail, they present the case of Topp and Son that made ovens for concentration camps. They also present the history of the corporate members convicted of crimes in this particular case, and how German businesses put moral principles aside. Now, Topp and Son made crematoria beginning in 1914 for the purpose of cremation. At one point, the family business had 1,150 employees. And what they found during the Holocaust is they began to fill orders for the SS for mobile ovens. One of the engineers there, Prüfer, developed more efficient ovens for incinerating bodies. And they competed with other companies that were trying to become more efficient in incinerating bodies. That was their major business goal. In 1941, they began to make ovens for Auschwitz-Birkenau. And they had company employees that actually went to the site to try to understand what they needed to do to create more efficient ovens. Eventually, the company employees were arrested and imprisoned by the Soviets. Prüfer died, and Ludwig Topp committed suicide. The others were released in 1955. Ernst Wolfgang Topp started a new company and denied his guilt, and legal investigations continued into Topp's company and until it went bankrupt, and he died in 1979. And Van Baar and Huisman ask, what might be the motivations for this company to build more efficient ovens for incinerating bodies? They didn't believe that ideology was a major factor. Neither was force. They weren't forced to do it. But what seems to be one of the major factors is they wanted to innovate and develop technical perfection for the ovens. In addition, the opportunity came up for state-sponsored corporate crime with the Nazis, and also control was turned around. Instead of the state controlling crime, they perpetrated the crime, that they incentivized criminal activity. But the oven builders, the company, did not probably consider their behavior as criminal. They were able to use techniques of neutralization and other strategies to justify their behavior when clearly they were complicit, and they played a major role in carrying out the murders that occurred. So this is an important case to look at. And I think sometimes it's important to take a particular case and move down to the more meso level, looking at individual behaviors as well, and looking at large-scale organizations. So when I read this and reread it and then started to put together my notes, I was just amazed how they were able to move back and forth between an individual engineer, between a particular concentration camp, between the entire state-run Nazi party that controlled all this. And so I think that really was a model sociological study on how to approach studying particular cases of those complicit bystanders, participants, perpetrators during the Holocaust. So one of the things I've tried to do throughout these videos is to present some ideas and theories and models that might be useful for you to use in your own research and teaching, but also trying to think about how can we provide models and methods that students can use for their own research to make their research as meaningful as possible, to get them interested in continuing their studies perhaps in the future. Okay, I want to move for a minute to another topic of analyzing photos of bystanders. I've always had an interest in photography, and throughout the years, it's changed. When I was a kid, I loved taking pictures when I lived in the woods in California. Try to take pictures of outdoor scenery, of sporting events. I believe I think it was called a Kodak Brownie camera. Yep, I'm old, no doubt about that. That was high tech back then. I remember also my cousin took a lot of photos too, and he had this camera and this flash bulb. I remember it was huge and sat on top, and we'd have to go take it to usually a drugstore would send your film to be developed, and you get it back about a week or two later. That was a long time ago. And then the Polaroid cameras. Well, I'm not going to conduct the history of photography here. What I think I'm going to do is go back and say that a lot of photos were taken during the Holocaust, and we have access to those. That some of the major museums have thousands of photographs that you can use and analyze. Families have photographs, and one of the books that I found, The Good Old Days, The Holocaust is Seen by Its Perpetrators and Bystanders, by Ernst Klee, Willy Dressen, and Volker Zess. And this was published a while back, and it's Konicke and Konicke Press from New York, published in 1988. This book, you can see I've marked all these pages and I've highlighted a lot throughout. But one of the things is that it has all kinds of entries, information from diaries, from observations, from documents, but also it has pictures as well. So analyzing photographs, we have to, really start looking at the context, the historical aspects, what was going on, who the photographer was. That perpetrators took pictures and made photo albums that were later recovered by investigators or donated by family members. So we have to remember a lot of photographs were taken by perpetrators, and it's a very distorted view. And also we have other photographers who were able to document pre-Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and post-Holocaust. Journalists, other people who had an interest in photography. I went ahead and I started looking at a couple cases where there were bystanders in photographs. And one of them that really came up, and you can see this on Wikipedia, they have a good description as well as some photographs, was the death dealer of Kovno. And this was an individual who killed a large number of Jews with a wooden club while a crowd cheered all around. The residents, I mean, how do we classify a crowd that forms of mothers and fathers with their kids and lifting their kids on their shoulders so they can see the death dealer of Kovno beat Jews to death with a club? So they're not really, they're collaborators. They're collaborators, if you will. And I have other photographs I use in presentations showing different violent scenarios and looking at the crowd. And you can study this in detail. And in other work I have on the Eitzengruppen, looking at the photographs there of their murderous activities. I have one photograph from a pogrom that occurred in 1941 where residents of the community went after Jews. And in one photo I got from Wikipedia, it shows a middle-aged woman running down the street, and she's being chased by teenagers with clubs. And they look like they're having such a good time chasing this woman and probably beating her with those clubs. And so we get into a lot of these scenarios and how people were thinking at the time. Photographs of Jews being led away to be murdered while non-Jews, residents of the community, watched. So I think really I'll start wrapping up here. And I hope that in this series of videos I've been able to provide some helpful information to pass on to you, to pass on to your students. Models of bystander behavior. And, you know, of course, the implications of all this become very relevant as we look at programs to turn bystanders into rescuers or people who take action to help. And how do we prevent bystanders from becoming perpetrators? And how do we make sense of all this? You know, I have a case from the Bosnian genocide that I published. And in this case, the person is a perpetrator, a victim, and a rescuer at different time periods. And the more I look into this case, the more complex it gets. Yeah, I published this case maybe 10 years ago. And I thought, okay, publication, it's in a book, a chapter in a book, I've done some presentations on it, what more could I do? And then I start studying bystanders. And I have to go back to my research and read and add and revise and update and begin to look at it in different ways. So there's really a lot of opportunities in this area. What I will do is I will have a reference page in the comment section, and so you can look up any of these publications, research studies, books that I mentioned. You have the full reference to make it easy to find in your library or bookstore or in journal articles. So I will post the references in the comment section, and hopefully that is useful as well. Well, I thank you all for coming on this journey with me as we explored bystanders during the Holocaust, and I wish you all the best in your own studies. Thank you.